inviting me to present. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many lands on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So I'm here today to formally launch the model accounts and the model budget, as Tony mentioned. In terms of the presentation, I'll just talk briefly about the process that we go through for updating the models, then run through some of the key changes for this year, and hopefully at the end leave some time for questions. So without further ado, all right. So first up, each year we facilitate a working group to guide the development and review of the model accounts and the model budget. So I just wanted to put up here on the slide a table showing all the people who've been part of that working group this year. FinPro have again provided excellent support to the process. And as you can see, Danny, Tony, Fiona and Alan have been involved in the model accounts working group this year. So thank you to all of you for your time and expertise. It's much appreciated, and just bringing that sector perspective to the process is really, really valuable. Also on the working group, we have representatives from, or a representative from CPA Australia, and we also have representatives from Vargo who sit on the working group in an observer capacity. And as Tony mentioned before, we have Martin Thompson, who's worked with us again to develop both the model accounts and the model budget. So these are the working group members for the model budget working group. So again, huge thanks to Hannah, Tony, Nathan, Binda and Simone for your time and efforts. Certainly much appreciated by myself and the team. In terms of the process itself, so each working group met 3 times between November and January. We sought and considered feedback via a survey of the sector, and then discussed and processed any changes required to both the model accounts and the model budget. So that's just a bit of background, I suppose, to the process that we go through on an annual basis. I have put in the chat just a link to where you can find the documents. So hopefully everyone can access those. They are up on LGV's website now. You should be able to find a copy of the model accounts and model budget, which are the Excel templates. There's also a better practice guide that goes along with each of those publications, and a detailed summary of changes document. I'll talk you through the key changes, but I would probably flag up front that those summary of changes documents are really important, and I'd encourage you, if you're a practitioner needing to go through what has actually changed, really encourage you to look at the summary of changes documents, because that's where the detail of sort of every single change sits. So that's they're quite important to have a look at. Just as an aside, LGV have also refreshed some of our other guidance publications that are available on this same webpage. So things like the report of operations and performance statement guidance, if you're looking for those, they're all also available here. All right, so in terms of the model accounts, what has changed for this year? Well, last year, the model accounts still made reference to the Local Government Act 1989 and the Local Government Planning and Reporting Regulations 2014, because of the transitional provisions basically in the new legislation and regulations. So therefore 2021-22 becomes the first year that the model accounts refer to the Local Government Act 2020 and the Local Government Planning and Reporting Regulations 2020. I'll put up here on the slide the certification of the financial statements. So that's one of the main changes. Just highlighted those references obviously need to change in this year's model accounts. There are some other references throughout the document which are listed in the summary of changes. So yeah, encourage you to have a look at those as well, but probably the certification is one of the main places where you'd see these changes that have been updated. Moving on, the comprehensive income statement, we've put a subtotal into the comprehensive income statement under the other comprehensive income area. So this is really just to, I guess, better distinguish between the surplus or deficit for the year and then the total of other comprehensive income, so that then the comprehensive result is effectively the sum, the aggregation of those two items. So yeah, just trying to make that a little bit clearer by adding a subtotal in there. The other change on the face of the statements is to the balance sheet. So we've added a line item for unearned income / revenue. So this is really to reflect the potential for recording a current liability in relation to contracts where the performance obligations are yet to be satisfied. So you're not able to recognise the income or revenue. So instead it's sitting as a current liability on the balance sheet. So we've added a line item in there this year to reflect that possibility, I suppose. And I should probably say the model accounts obviously is the basis for the model budget. So these changes I'll touch on later, but they're also reflected in the model budget document. Moving to note 1, so we have moved a section. Previously we had a section titled Overview in the model accounts, so it's still there, but we've shifted it into note 1 of the accounts. This is effectively to, I suppose, make sure it's a complete set of accounts. So you've got some primary financial statements and notes to the accounts. They're really the two components. So just to make sure that the overview forms part of the notes to the accounts. That's why we've shifted this information into note 1. The knock-on effect there is that the previous note 1, which was performance against budget disclosures, has moved into note 2. So there is a bit of a shift and a change there. There's obviously a consequential impact on the table of contents. But yeah, as I say, important to make sure the overview information is actually sitting within a note to the accounts. In terms of the slide there, I've highlighted, we've also made some changes to the text and the disclosures in that overview. So the content's been updated to include details about the not-for-profit status, historical cost convention, going concern assumption, currency and rounding. Moving forward to note 5.4, we've included some provision for disclosure of borrowings from the Treasury Corporation of Victoria. Hopefully everyone's aware that as of last year, that a framework was announced for TCV loans, councils being able to access those. So just distinguishing in the model accounts between loans from TCV under the TCV loans framework as opposed to, I suppose, other borrowings from commercial lenders, from banks. Note 8.1, the contingent liabilities note. We've refreshed the text disclosures in this note that now reflect the cessation of the MAV work care scheme and the 6-year liability period following on from that. Obviously, this doesn't affect all 79 councils, but the councils that were members of the scheme, we've just refreshed that disclosure to reflect, I suppose, the current situation. I've listed on the slide here, I suppose, a number of other changes. So the superannuation disclosures have been updated to reflect Vision Super's short form note text. So hopefully those two align, and the contribution rates for super have been updated to 10%. The title of note 5.3 has been updated. I think previously it was just payables. Now it's payables, trust funds and deposits, and unearned income revenue. So just to better reflect the actual content of the note. As I mentioned previously, the table of contents has been updated to reflect this shift in Note 1 and Note 2. There's some additional accounting policy text and a table that's been added to Note 3.4, which is funding from other levels of government. And this is in relation to the revenue and income accounting standards, AASB 15 and AASB 1058. There has also been some additional accounting policy text added throughout the note disclosures. And again, due to the inclusion of an unearned income revenue line in the balance sheet, note 9.2, the cash flow reconciliation, has been amended to reflect that line item too. So there is a reasonably significant amount of change to the model accounts this year. As I mentioned, driven in part by the legislative and regulatory references changing. So that's required a fair bit of change. There's some new information, as I covered, with the TCV loans, the MAV work care scheme, and updated superannuation information has driven some of that. And some of it is from feedback from Vargo of a review of the content of the model effectively. So I guess, as I mentioned earlier, I'd encourage preparers of financial statements to review the summary of changes document, as that's really where all the detail of all these changes is available. Last year, one of the changes we made was moving the guidance related to the model accounts into the Excel template itself. So it sits there as a separate tab in the model accounts. So just to quickly highlight a couple of things that have changed in there. So again, consistent with what I said earlier, the text and references in that guidance have all been updated to reflect the Local Government Act 2020 and the Local Government Planning and Reporting Regulations 2020 and other references. The guidance around grants, we've included a link to the publication that FinPro and LGB prepared a couple of years back when the new accounting standards around revenue and income came in. So just a link to that publication, and also some additional guidance regarding commentary on material grants. In terms of guidance on trade and other receivables, we've added some text there around the inclusion of details of terms of settlement for material line items. And the Community Asset Committee, which is the language used in the Local Government Act 2020, we've updated that where the previous reference was to Committee of Management. So look, that's the model accounts changes this year, I suppose. I'll quickly flick through to the better practice guide that accompanies the model accounts. But effectively, there's not much change in here because most of the guidance sits in the accounts template itself. So again, dates have been rolled forward to reflect the 2021-22 financial year, and all the references to legislation and regulations have been updated in the better practice guide. I'll move through to the model budget and the changes to the model budget document for this year. So consistent with what I said earlier, to match the model accounts, subtotal's been added into the comprehensive income statement to capture that total other comprehensive income and better distinguish between other comprehensive income and the income and expenses above. And equally, the balance sheet also reflects the addition of a line item in current liabilities for unearned income and revenue. Probably worth mentioning, because the budget obviously is 1 year ahead of the model accounts, the changes in relation to the references to legislation and regulations largely went through last year in this document. So most of those already changed in the previous year. We have added an additional note disclosure this year to provide information around proposals to lease council land, if it's applicable. We've also added in some guidance, so a new guidance note into the better practice guide, which is guidance note G18, which just discusses the requirements around this, which is a legislative requirement under Section 115 of the Local Government Act 2020. In terms of other changes to the model budget, the rate cap of 1.75% has been reflected in the model budget. The gender splits in the 4-year summary of planned human resources expenditure and FTE numbers by employment type have been amended to reflect the precise language in the regulations. We just had to tighten that up a little bit. There's also an optional format that's been included this year. So I think the regulations require the disclosure of women, men, and persons of self-described gender. The optional format also allows for 2 additional line items for new and vacant positions. So not required, but an option there if you wanted to include those disclosures in your budget. And consistent with what I mentioned earlier, the compliance checklist has been updated just to reflect the requirement to disclose proposals to lease council land if that's applicable. In terms of the model budget better practice guide that accompanies the model budget, again, dates have been rolled forward to reflect the budget year and the 3 subsequent years. As I mentioned, there's some additional guidance included around the proposals to lease council land that's been added in, and the compliance checklist, as I said, reflects the requirement to disclose proposals to lease council land as well. There are some other minor changes to the better practice guide and model budget. So again, encourage people to go and look at the summary of changes to sort of capture all the minute detail. And look, finally, just a reminder that, yeah, the suite of refreshed templates and publications for the 2021-22 reporting period and the 22-23 planning period are also now available on the LGV website. So Tony, that's it from me. Thank you for listening, everyone, and happy to take any questions at this point if there are any.
Well, thanks, Daniel, for the concise but informative update, and just an opportunity to say thanks for all the work you do for the sector, because you do put the time for us all to assist us through each and every year. So if there's any questions, feel free to, as always, put them through the chat, or if you've got a question, put your hand up and you can put your camera on. And but so far, Daniel, no questions coming through. Maybe everyone's digesting it, and maybe you've just hit the nail on the head for everyone, or they're going to go back and have a read and come back with any questions they may have. But yeah, again, if there's none coming through, I just want to thank you again for the time. Oh, there's one come through from Xavier. What's the difference between 4.1.2.3.4 and 4.1.2.3.4 optional?
Great question. I think off the top of my head, I mean, so where we've put optional, obviously it's a non-mandatory disclosure. You have the option or the choice to include it. I think from memory that might be the 4 years worth of disclosures in some of the notes.
Typically, where we put optional, I think it's to do with the discretion, whether there's the need to have it in there, but we'd have to go back to that particular disclosure.
Yeah.
If you need to take that on board, Daniel, that's fine too. Yeah. While you're looking at that, another one's come through. New note 4.7 talks about land, but I presume that applies to buildings as well, which I'm sure it does, but we'd have to go. I think Xavier's happy with the response there, Daniel.
Okay. Yeah.
But note 4.7 talks about land, but I presume that applies to buildings as well.
So I think this is the proposal to lease council
Lease.
land.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it is specific to land, was my
Okay.
understanding, without looking at it in detail, because I think it's a legislative requirement. I think it's really about proposals to lease council land.
Specifically.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's that one. Any other ones? Doesn't look like it. Thank you for answering the question there from Xavier. Yeah, that's about it, Daniel, I think, for now. But if there's if any come through afterwards, I'm sure we'll compile them and shoot them through for the group and for yourself to consider as well, Daniel.
Yeah,
So
more than happy to take any subsequent questions, Tony.